The SNP launched a skills strategy in 2007. During that launch and part of the strategy, they said this: "A smarter Scotland is at the heart of everything we want to achieve for this country." Now, 17 years on, we've got the report card on the SNP's skills strategy. The OECD have published a report this week, and it says there were multiple barriers to developing skills in Scotland. It says the SNP Government's engagement with employers is limited in outreach, and carers agencies remain fragmented. In a damning conclusion, the OECD state the link between the SNP's skill policies and economic development is, and I use the OECD's word, weak. Weak. Does the First Minister agree with the OECD that his government's record on skills, after 17 years of the SNP being in power, is weak?
First Minister.
Obviously, the Government will look carefully at the OECD report, but I don't agree with that conclusion. The Government has invested heavily in the skills sector over many years. Engagement with business is work which has been undertaken by a whole range of different organisations, not least of which by Skills Development Scotland, to make sure that we undertake skills audits in localities. And that involves engaging with employers to make sure that we understand the future skills needs of individual localities and to make sure that that is provided for by the skills and development system within Scotland. And obviously, when we look at the outcomes that have been achieved as a consequence of our investment, we see young people who are involved in record positive destinations as a consequence of their participation in skills development in Scotland.
Douglas Ross.
Sorry, First Minister, you can't just say you disagree with the outcome of a report, because the damning assessment of 17 years is this government has been weak on skills. And not surprisingly, the First Minister ended his answer speaking about young people in positive destinations. They do that every year. They trumpet their success in young people going to positive destinations. But the OECD report, which I don't believe the First Minister has read based on his first answer, says that being in a positive destination shortly after finishing secondary school does not guarantee positive outcomes in the long run. It says we should be monitoring positive destinations not only after 3 months, but after 3 years and even beyond. Now, the SNP, in their manifesto of 2021, pledged a young person's guarantee that would ensure that everyone between 16 and 24 years old would have the opportunity for education, training and a job. So can the First Minister tell us, how is that going? How many young Scottish people are currently economically inactive or not in education? How many?
First Minister.
I don't have that specific figure in front of me just now, but what I can tell Douglas Ross is that in a whole variety of different sectors, there is provision available for young people to participate in developing their skills, whether that's in the provision of college places around the country, whether that's through the provision of modern apprenticeships or the development of foundation apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships, which are part of the reform programme the Government has brought forward, or whether that's about making available university places where, of course, we find there are a record number of young people from Scotland participating in higher education, and, of course, much to my satisfaction and the satisfaction of the Government and its policy objectives, a record number of young people from deprived backgrounds taking part in higher education. So I accept that we always have to keep these issues under review. That's why we commissioned the Withers Review, and which we are taking forward the reform of post-school education as a consequence of that work, to make sure that Scotland's skills system meets the needs of not only the population of Scotland, but also the businesses of Scotland, and supports our approach to investment in our country as well.
Douglas Ross.
Well, if I thought it after the first answer, I'm certain after the second that the First Minister has not read this extremely important OECD report, which is damning on his government's failure over 17 years. And the First Minister also said there that he was satisfied with what's happening. I'm not satisfied that he can't come to this chamber and answer a simple question. So let me tell him The answer that he should know, as First Minister and a former Education Secretary, is 52,700. 52,700 young Scots aged between 16 to 24, economically inactive and not in education. Why should the First Minister know that? Because it is 1 in 10 of 16 to 24-year-olds, and it is the highest number ever on record. The highest number ever. I would have thought the First Minister would have been aware of that. The Young Persons Guarantee was launched by John Swinney when he was Education Secretary. And just a few weeks ago, the Minister in charge of the Young Persons Guarantee said its work had now been mainstreamed across government. If you strip away the ministerial jargon, it's clear that this complacent government thinks that the job is done. Yet these alarming figures, I remind the First Minister, the highest ever on record, tell a very different story. So isn't it the case that the Young Persons Guarantee is yet another broken SNP promise?
First Minister.
No. What it is that we take ideas and projects and we make them available right across the country. So that in every... Because the Young Persons Guarantee, well, the Young Person Guarantee started off as a proposition within the City of Edinburgh. A tremendously good idea brought forward, led by Sandy Begbie of Scottish Financial Enterprise, and it was a and partnered with the City of Edinburgh Council. It was a very good proposition. We listened to that learning and we applied that across the country. That's the right thing to do. Now, the problem with the statistics that Douglas Ross puts to me, of course, is that in the most recent economic inactivity data that's available, there was a significant fall in economic inactivity in Scotland and an increase in economic participation. Now, these are challenging issues, and the work on tackling economic inactivity is fundamental to encouraging economic participation, but it commands the focus of government to make sure that we maximise the number of people taking part in the labour market and participating in Scotland's economy.
Douglas Ross.
The real problem with the figures is Scotland's First Minister doesn't know that 52,700 16 to 24-year-olds are economically inactive and not in education, the highest ever on record. That is the problem, and that is what John Swinney should be focusing on. Now, the OECD are not alone in highlighting how weak the SNP are in delivering for young people. Today, Audit Scotland issued a damning verdict on their funding cuts to Scotland's colleges. The SNP's underfunding of our college sector has left many institutions with a bleak and uncertain future. And Audit Scotland predict the situation is only going to get worse with further job losses and rising financial deficits. So under the SNP, we have a skills strategy that doesn't help people get jobs, an education reform agenda that doesn't lead to any reforms, colleges that are going bust, and a young person's guarantee that doesn't guarantee anything. So how is John Swinney, as First Minister, going to do a better job with any of this than John Swinney did as Education Secretary?
First Minister.
President Officer, obviously I'm very familiar with the contents of the Audit Scotland report this morning, and the Audit Scotland report highlights the challenges that exist within the public finances, and the government is of course supporting the college sector with £750 million worth of investment in the current financial year, and I welcome that commitment because that's been delivered against the backdrop of a really difficult financial climate for the public services, which have been created by the economic mismanagement of the public finances by the last Conservative government, of which Douglas Ross.
Let's hear the First Minister.
Of which Douglas Ross was a loyal foot soldier who wanted me to follow the budget of Liz Truss. So the problem that Douglas Ross has got is that he perpetually comes along to this Parliament asking me to spend more money. Mr Ross perpetually comes along to this Parliament asking me to spend more money. He asked me to spend more money last week on peak rail fares. He asked me to spend more money on free school meals for primary 6 and 7 pupils. He's now asking me to spend more money on colleges when he will not
I would ask those members, and I am aware of whose voices I can hear from here, to resist the temptation to contribute at this point. You have not been called to speak. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Mr Ross last week asked me to spend more money on free school meals, to spend more money on peak rail fares, and today he wants me to spend more money on colleges at the same time as he wants me to reduce tax and take £1.5 billion out of the public finances and support the Liz Truss economic madness which has inflicted misery on our country. I'm going to listen to nothing Douglas Ross says to me in his remaining couple of weeks, because his record is one of absolute abject economic failure.
Question.